Hello. This is a video I'm making to share what I've discovered from my first 3 days of using Silkypix Developer Studio 7 Pro. This is linked to a thread going on at dpreview.com in the Panasonic Compact Camera Talk forum. I'm completely new to Silkypix, and over the last 3 days I've been playing on and off with now 13 images, which I'm just going to quickly show on the screen. You're not going to be able to tell anything about any issues that were involved in capturing these, although we will talk about some of these later in the video, and you're not going to be able to tell anything about the quality of the images that I've produced. I'm going to post full-size versions of these up at Flickr, and we'll put the link to those the album with those images in on the comments or description of this video at YouTube, and I'll do the same for the thread that's discussing all this sort of stuff at DP Review. I did choose the images so that some were quite ordinary and some were quite definitely and deliberately done so as to be awkward to deal with. Now I'm going to be saying some quite negative things to begin with about Silkypix, but it's important not to jump to any conclusions. So I want to start by saying, yep, I've worked on these 13 images. It's not a huge number, but I've had to keep going backwards and forwards as I've been discovering where buttons are and what I can do and how things work. Of those 13 images, I've been comparing what I've produced with what I've either produced previously for those images or have just produced with them using my currently normal software, which is Lightroom 6 and sometimes DxO Optics Pro 10, and that's a fairly powerful setup that, especially with Lightroom, I'm fairly familiar with. Not so familiar with DxO yet. And of those 13 images and the comparisons I've made with what I've produced with Lightroom and DxO, in 2 cases I prefer the ones from DxO and Lightroom. In 3 cases it's too close to call. Either they're just too similar or they've both got something wrong with them that I don't like. One of them was produced in one case with DxO and then Lightroom, and in the other case with DxO and then Silkypix, and I prefer the one that used DxO and Silkypix. And in 7 cases out of the 13, I prefer the Silkypix version. By the way, I did the processing of the using Silkypix without reference to the other images. I wasn't trying to recreate them, I just started from scratch and did what seemed to come naturally with the software. I'm sufficiently pleased with the results that I've got, some of which I don't think I could have achieved actually with Lightroom, or in one case anyway, that I'm probably going to buy this software, and it may become my main tool for raw development. So the fact I'm going to say some negative things about it shouldn't necessarily put you off. So let's start by having a look at the user interface. Here we've got along the top various icons which let us go into various modes. There's one here for comparing either the same picture with different settings or one picture with another picture. We can show highlights and shadows and so on, And there are some other things here as well. This one's for cropping, for example. These two are for rotating, and this is for actually producing a JPEG or a TIFF from what you're doing. So there's various things along the top, and you do get these palettes coming up. This is the crop tool palette, and I put it away, and the cropping, the whole business about cropping goes away. If I turn off this mode with two screens, so that's along the top, then we can have on the left here the file structure, and like in DxO and a lot of other products, and unlike in Lightroom, you don't have to import anything. You can just point at the thing you want to deal with and get on with it, which I like. Along the bottom, as we've seen, you may have the list of files that are in the folder that you're currently dealing with. And on the right, we're going to see the things that we need in order to alter, to adjust our images, and various things will be popping up here on the right, which we'll see as we go along. And then along the bottom, unfortunately I can't show you the absolute bottom of this screen, so there's some things along beneath this, just a little row of things that you can't see, to do with setting a colour for the an image, and one or two other things. There are also pop-ups. As I move my mouse along on the right hand corner there, I'm seeing pop-ups as to what these things do, and you're not. Now that's easy enough to find things, and when you hover over things it tells you what they are, and a lot of them have got this eye on them, and if you click on that it takes you to the online manual, which is good. It's good that it takes you there. The manual itself is a bit of a mixture. One of the things with Silkypix is that it uses odd language. For example, in several other products you have things called presets, which are sets of parameters that you can save and then apply to one or more images without having to go through the whole rigmarole again. In Silkypix these are referred to as tastes. Well, okay, it's a different word. The trouble is they use different words a lot, and sometimes this gets combined with using different concepts, and things can get a bit confusing at that point. For example, I'm used to having a highlights slider in my products. If I've got highlights that are very bright, I like to be able to just grab hold of a slider with highlights written on it and slide it to the left, and hey presto, the highlights are brought down. Similarly with shadows, bringing up shadows. There is no slider for highlights or shadows. There is something called the highlight controller. Here it is. And I saw this and I thought, good, this is where I'll control highlights. Well, no, actually, you don't. It turns out that this is what you might call a modifier palette. It alters the way that highlights and this alters the way that highlights are dealt with. As far as I can see, there's no equivalent to this for shadows. And in order to deal with highlights or shadows, you then have to go over here and drop this box down and use one of these 6 things, which don't talk about highlights or shadows. They talk about dodging and burning. Now, some of the older members of the audience, like me, may remember about dodging and burning from the days of producing prints. And having them larger and all that sort of thing. I don't know whether younger people will know what they are or not, but it seems a bit of a strange word to use for it. I mean, there is a bit of a logic to it if you know the background, but it's odd. And the other thing is that what these things do isn't exactly pulling the highlights down. in the normal way. And as we'll see in the first example, actually it can do things that are better than that, to do with colours. And I've found that I've had to read the manual in order to find out how these things work, or some of these things work. It is not obvious in some cases, but having read the manual and got over the fact that it is written a bit oddly, in fact, let's go and have a look at the manual for the highlight controller. If I go to Help and open the software manual, and I just start, this is in Firefox, I just start typing highlight, there we go, highlight controller, and it's got writing, a lot of which is perfectly understandable. It's got, now let me just turn something on a moment. It's got, there we go, it's got illustrations. It's got examples, for example, showing you 3 effects of using this highlight controller with the settings in different places. Another different way of using it, which we're going to see in a minute. And another one as well to do with the way it affects colours when there's one channel that's been blown and the colours have gone wrong. So it's, oh, and there's another one. So it's actually very instructive, the Help. You may just have to work at it a bit though. Let's look around. On the right here we've got about the there we go, you can change the oh dear, white balance type setting, put it back to default, and here you've got the what he calls exposure bias, and sorry, that's going off the right hand side from your point of view as well, where you can make things brighter and darker. Then you've got this business which turns out to be to do with highlights and shadows. And then here we've got, going down, we've got white balance settings, how contrast is dealt with. Now here's an interesting thing. If we look down here, we've got these sliders that you can use. And there's also a tone curve. Some of you will be familiar with using curves from other products like Photoshop and Elements and PaintShop Pro and so on. And you can bend the curve, and which has an effect on how the image looks. If I can get rid of these. One of the nice things about this contrast thing is that it's got a little box on it, and you can organize it so that now whatever I do on these sliders is reflected on the way the curve looks in curves. So you can get an insight actually into how curves works, and you might use that to learn a bit about what these curves actually, what it means when the curves move in different directions, and then start using it manually yourself, pulling it around like I just did. So that's contrast. You've then got colours, different colour setups that you can apply. And here we've got sharpening, of which there are several sorts, which you get at down here. That's dropped off the bottom unfortunately, but it's natural sharp, normal sharp, pure detail and unsharp mask, which again some of you will know about. And the other side of that is we've got noise reduction. And there are various alterations you can make to that. Now with these 4, every time I used them something different popped out underneath, sliders and so on. And there's a different lot where down the bottom, if I click on one of these, and in fact I did it for curves, you get one of these palettes, dialog boxes, whatever, turn up. So going across them we've got white balance. Now the white balance is handled differently again. I'm used to having temperature and tint. Temperature is the more used one, where it changes from blue to yellow, and you can turn midday into late afternoon by pushing the thing towards the yellow. The other one is Tint, where it's used mainly for correcting colour. Oh dear, what's it called? Yeah, when you got the wrong colour. Do you know, it's gone out of my mind. Never mind. This is different. That doing a pure temperature type thing is quite difficult, because there's no line directly for you to follow. On the other hand, if you do want to make precise colour adjustments, and we'll see one of those a bit later, this really makes it a doddle. Rather than having to fiddle around with two sliders and try and work out where each one should be, you can just go directly to the particular place and watch the effect as you're doing it, and stop when you get to the place where you need to be. And I think that's a bit good, I think. So that's the white balance. Then curves that we've seen, the highlight controller that we've seen and we'll take another look at in a minute, a fine colour controller which lets you change the colours in a particular range. For example, there's a lot of oranges in this. So if I was to change the hue of the oranges, they've now gone yellower and they've now gone redder in that direction. And you can change the saturation of the oranges in this case, for example, or how bright they are. So everything that's orange E is now going brighter or darker. So it lets you change different ranges of the properties of different ranges of colours. This next one lets you deal with shading. Here's another different way of putting it. This is vignetting. So it's letting you deal with vignetting around the corners of your image. This is dealing with barrel distortion and pincushion distortion. And this is dealing with chromatic aberration. Again, grouped together in a way that's perfectly logical, but probably different from any other product. Here we have a palette which deals with rotation and perspective effects, vertical and horizontal perspective effects. I don't know what the bottom one. Oh, this is to do with the perspective you're getting from the focal length of the camera. In fact, it knows correctly for the cameras I'm using what focal length it is, so I don't think there'd be any point in changing that, but I'm sure someone will tell me that I'm wrong about that. Probably some creative use for it. Next we have effects, of which there aren't a whole lot, and I have no idea what they do. Portrait beautification, I'd have to look that up to see what it does, but I don't do portraits, so it probably doesn't matter to me. How big the effects are, and whether you want to add noise, which people sometimes wonder why you'd want to do that. And lastly here, last but one, we've got development settings, which is, now by development it means produce an image like a JPEG or a TIFF, and these are to do with this one's to do with how the demosaic is doing, which is at the beginning of the process, not the end of it. I haven't actually looked at this, so colour space as well. What colour space it's going to go out into? Yeah, either sRGB, which is not usual on the internet, or Adobe RGB. If you use that on the internet, people will see the wrong colours. And finally, in the corner, we've got a history one where you can see. Well, you can see that you've done something a number of times. You can't actually see what you've done, I don't think. If I double click on it, no, it doesn't go anywhere. So that's a quick run around the interface. And now let's look at some examples. So here's a ship taken at sunset. The sun had just gone down. And how are we going to deal with the highlights in the sky? We're looking at the moment at the original raw image, and here's what it turned into in Silkypix, and here is what it looked like when I did it in Lightroom. And when I look closely at these, I prefer the Silkypix ones for a couple of reasons. One is that I prefer the way the colours are handled. I've actually decided to render it like that. With the Lightroom and DxO one, I pretty much got what I was given as far as the colours. I could bring the level of the light up and down, but I couldn't do much to alter how the colours were rendered. So this brings us to the highlight controller here. Now what I'm going to do is to move this slider over to chroma. And I think there was actually a slight change in the image. I'm going to move it right to the other end now, which is luminance. And you can see that whatever it is it's doing, it's to do with lightness now. And if I move it to the other end, whatever it's doing, it's to do with colour. And I'm now going to go to what's effectively shadows and highlights. And I've got 6 options, which very roughly translate to burn is highlights, dodge is shadows, or I can do both of them at once. What I can't do is some of one and then some of the other separately. So if you're going to use these, you've either got to use one or the other or both. And then there's another 3 which are the same, except it says HDR on it, and I haven't got to the bottom of exactly the circumstances in which they are, or how they're different. They are different. And I'm going to use HDR at the moment. And I think I'll just use HDR, which is both dodging and burning, which is highlights and shadows. So as I turn this slider up, we saw the shadows come up. And also, I'll do that again. I've gone back to the beginning. And what I'll do is go in a little bit so we can see what's happening there. So I'm at the left hand end at the moment. This is not applying any effect at all. So I'm going to increase it, and the side of the ship, the dark side of the ship, is coming up, and the sky is becoming darker. So this is a both at once effect. And if I let go, you probably can't see it on the video, but as I was doing that, there was an awful lot of noise on the side of the ship. When I let go, that noise, yeah, there it's gone. It disappears. It takes a little while thinking about it. Now I'm going to move this slider here to the other end. And now I'm going to go back to the beginning, and that's how it looked like originally, I think. And I'm going to move it to the right, and that's taking the highlights down. Now that's the normal sort of taking highlights down approach that you'd expect to see. But we've still got some white there. There's a secondary control here as well. If I go back to the beginning and put it back to chroma, this next one down affects what happens if you're dealing with the colours rather than the light. So you can either concentrate on the saturation, so that whatever colour it's showing at the moment, it's going to be more, well, intense. No, less intense, because it's a highlights operation. But it's still quite yellow, I think. And in hue, oh yes, this goes rather peculiar. It goes magenta, exactly what's going on there, and oh, and now the magenta's gone away. One would need to experiment with these things to work out exactly what they're doing. And luminance restoration, I did read about a few minutes ago, but to be quite honest, I've forgotten what it was about. Dynamic range is a bit interesting, and we may see that in a few minutes. So that's how it deals, or how I think of it anyway, in terms of dealing with highlights and shadows. And I have to say, I quite like that. Now here's an example which I deliberately made difficult. By the way, these images are captured with the FZ200, so we're dealing with a camera with a small sensor and a very noisy sensor too, which, if you're going to raise shadows a lot, is generally an issue. Now here we've got this image, which is dark at the bottom and light at the top. And just to show you how dark it is and how bright it is, this is what Fast Raw Viewer thinks about it. It thinks that it's overexposed up here, and that it's underexposed down here. So there's a bit of a problem with this image. If you fix this, you're going to make that worse, and if you fix this, you're going to make that worse. So what can we do with it? Well, let me show you two renderings of it. The first one was with Silkypix, and the next one was with Lightroom. They're fairly similar, and it turns out I've discovered after I did these I can make them more similar. At the moment the cloud looks rather flat there, and the one in Lightroom looks much more to my liking. It's got more edges to it and more texture and so on. It turns out I can get that effect in here as well. I just didn't do it right. This is one of the pairs of images that I regard as too close to call. They're different, and to be honest I don't like either of them much, because they've got a look, sort of a flat, strange look to them, a bit like I associate with an HDR image that hasn't been tone mapped. And see, I'm not keen on either. Whether one could make something more realistic, because this was a very sunny day, and again this just doesn't look much like a very sunny day to me. There's something wrong with it. There were two problems with this one, and let's deal with the geometry problem first rather than the highlights and shadows. The first thing I'm going to do is to give this an auto get the light level right go, and so it's a little bit brighter than it was. And let me just turn the brightness up for the moment so you can see what's going on. It'll blow the sky, but we can come back to that in a minute. There's a lamppost here which is leaning at the top over to the right, and there's a tower here which is more or less upright. So basically these are leaning inwards. What I've got is perspective distortion caused by the fact that I'm looking up at these things. So I want to get rid of that. So I go to the lens aberration controller, and I click on the middle one, which is distortion, and I realise I've done the wrong thing. So I go away and come back to the rotation shift lens effect palette, and here we have vertical perspective. So as with other products, I can pull this one, and if I pull it in the right direction it helps. So now they're going outwards a bit, and I think it probably needs a bit of rotation, and you typically have to play with these in combination until you can get the right pair of effects. And I'm doing it the wrong way again. You get the idea. Something like that. So let's put that away. So that's dealing with vertical perspective distortion, and dealing with horizontal perspective distortion, if you want to, is similar. So I put that away. Now we've got this business about the light levels. So this is back to where it was before. Basically the bottom's too dark and the top's too bright. So what I'm going to do is something that they've put into this new version of Silkypix, which they call the partial correction tool, and it's got a palette that you'll be able to see most of, and I'm going to put down something which it calls a gradual correction filter, which again is very logical. It's what Lightroom calls a graduated filter. What's happened now is that it's put this line down, and everything is very bright above it because it's adding a lot of lightness. It's got the lightness turned up. Why it does this is so that you can see. This will be more obvious when we use one of the sort of circular, oval ones. But you can see where it is where the effect's going to be. So if I turn that around, it's now making the bottom of the image brighter. And if I rotate it a bit and pull it down, and that will help with the brightness at the bottom. The difficulty I've got with and the difficulty you've generally got with these is if you've got a sharp boundary between darkness and light, you've got a bit of a problem, because you're very likely to get either what I've got here, which is a white area or a wrong colour area along the boundary, or if you pull it far enough down in order to not have that problem, you'll find any bits that are sticking out like this don't have the effect that you want on them. So you might have to get more detailed about this to finesse it. It depends very much on the image. but you can see the direction in which that's going, and you can pull this out so that the change from the effect to not having the effect happens more gradually, so you can hide it, and again that can help with the boundaries. Now I've got the top, which I'm thinking is too bright, and the particular thing, I don't much mind about the sky being bright, but these clouds, I want these clouds to be less bright. So what I'm going to do is to use one of the other sort, the oval sort. I'm going to put it down, and now you can see why it turns it up to white, because you really can see where you're putting this down. It's also got this handle on it that you can use to turn it around as well. And the reason I turned it around was because you'd be able to see the handle when I'm actually using it. Oops, I can't turn it that way. And so you can make it bigger. And so what I want is to try and get a bit more texture and definition into that cloud. So I'm going to turn this lightness down now. In fact, I'm going to turn it down even further. Whoops, too far. I can see a border around it. But what I could do, for example, there, I think that's a bit better than it was. I've just turned it down ever so slightly, and I might be able to increase the contrast a bit in that area. Now I did this more successfully previously. Oh, perhaps if I make the feathering wider, and now perhaps I can alter the lightness a bit and it won't show around the boundary so much. Or perhaps I'll make this even, make this even bigger. Yeah, anyway, you get the general idea. So that is these partial, whatever it is it calls them, partial correction tool things, gradual effect filters. And you can also, you can change the hue, that's the colour of the colour. You can change the feathering, which is how quickly the effect changes from being on to not being on outside the area. What you can't do, as far as I know, is to reverse the effect. I like with the oval ones in Lightroom being able to affect what's outside it rather than what's inside it. I don't think you can do that. You can affect the saturation in the area, the brightness of it and the contrast of it, and you can also change the white balance, which again I think has some potential. Now it'll look absolutely stupid doing it here, but there are circumstances in which being able to almost paint with a different colour inside it is potentially useful. Another thing you can do is to turn, oh here it is, you can turn this on so that you can see where you've applied effects, because I did one the other day where I had 8 of these and it was quite useful to be able to see where they were, and you can then choose them more easily and work out which one it is you want to deal with. So that's the partial filters thing. So that is the difficult image which produced these two rather strange looking effects. And with more work I suspect it would be possible to make it look a bit better, or it may just be beyond me, I don't know. The next one is well, it was difficult. I'm going to raise the brightness of this by 3 stops, which is a lot for a camera with a small sensor. And that's your starting position when you're dealing with this. Now, I tried this in Silkypix and found that as soon as I applied any sharpening, and possibly, I can't remember, possibly even before I did that, it was looking pretty grim close up, and even I mean I was cropping it to something like that sort of area, which again, remember, we're dealing with a small sensor here, and that on top of the fact that the light had been pulled up so much meant that sharpening was an absolute nightmare. It just fell apart very quickly. What I was comparing it with was something that had been produced with DxO Optics Pro and then Lightroom, and I'd used DxO Optics Pro's prime noise reduction, which only works on raw files. So I thought it was fair to apply that again, or use the same file in fact, and see what Silkypix made of it. And in fact, I then discovered I preferred that's the one where I preferred the Silkypix version of the combined approach. Incidentally, with the cropping, you can pick a particular aspect ratio, and it will keep it to that, or you can constrain it to the original proportions so that you alter it and it stays the same proportions. Or you can pick print sizes, printer settings. I've never done that before. I don't know. Has something popped up somewhere? I can't see. Oh, there we go. Oh, I see. Right, that's the print dialog come up. Fair enough. Since I don't print things from here, at least, that's not terribly useful. Incidentally, one of the things about this product is that it can be a bit slow to respond. When I'm using Lightroom, it's very responsive. This isn't so responsive. Sometimes you're left waiting for a second or two while something happens. Now, I've got quite a powerful machine here. It's a quad processor with 16 gig of memory, an SSD hard disk, and something else that makes it. Oh yes, a rather powerful graphics card that I used for playing games, single player games, which are pretty graphics intensive. And a lot of these products will use the graphics card in order to speed up the calculations that it needs to do. I don't know whether Silkypix is doing this, but it is noticeably less responsive than some of the other products that I've used. So that was a big increase in exposure, a big lift from shadows, which was unsurprisingly noisy. Oh, this is one of the ones that I produced, and this is the other one. I think this is the one that came from Silkypix, and this is the one that came from Lightroom. You can't tell anything from that because it's so small. Here we've got, that's given the game away a bit. Here we've got, now that tool is the partial Watsits. Let me just turn that off. I didn't realise that was going to stay illuminated. Put that away. Right, here we've got, that's a bit interesting. Okay, here we've got a bee, and for some reason, oh well, I don't know why it's gone to that one. This is the version that I produced in Silkypix, which is why we saw that that area with the box around it. Let's just make this a bit bigger. Oh, incidentally, another thing is, one of the things I like about this is that here's the picture that I'm working on, and I can move it around. So that if I want to make space, and imagine I'm normally working on a much bigger screen area than this, so I don't have all this problem with these palettes getting in the way, but they can tend to clutter up if you've got 4 or 5 of them open at the same time. So you can move this so that you've got space to put things in. I think that's absolute magic. Really like that. So here's a version of this bee, and here's another version. Now this is the version that I produced with DxO Optics Pro and then Lightroom. And this is what happened. It's very difficult with these photos done with Flash to avoid getting these highlighted areas. And I'd used Lightroom and or DxO Lightroom probably to try and pull this down as much as possible, but that's as far as I got. Compare it with the Silkypix one, and it may not be perfect. I mean, the detail is lost in there. You won't get it back. But the fact I've been able to effectively paint a colour in there by using one of these areas and then using the white balance on it has, I think, stopped it drawing the eye as much as it was previously. And oh, I see. Right, this is the raw image on which I must have been practicing earlier. I got this wrong, and I forgot to take it off. Okay, this is the raw image, and if I go back to here and delete this one by going to the dustbin, There we go. Right, that's what the raw looks like if you haven't done anything to it and you've just read it into Silkypix. Okay. Here is what it looked like with DxO and Lightroom, and here is what it looked like with Silkypix, and I've matched the colours I think a bit better there, and I don't find that nearly so troublesome to look at. And I realised afterwards I could do the same thing in Lightroom. It's just that I'd never tried using that particular facility before. Now, whether it's because of something about Lightroom or just because I was incompetent in the way I did it, it didn't come out looking, to me, that doesn't look nearly as good as that does. And in fact, there's hairs in there that have disappeared in this version that you can see in this version. That might just be incompetence on my part because the technique I was using was very similar. Another thing about these close-up images is the sharpening that they need. They're full of detail, and you want to get as much detail as you can out of it, and that does require sharpening. And I've found the sharpening in here to be okay. There is one issue, and I talked about that earlier. If you've got noise, then the Silkypix stuff will fall apart. You can get a particularly nasty, I was going to say grainy effect, but it isn't grainy in the sort of normal noise effect. It's more like intense JPEG artifacts, loads of them, and it looks absolutely horrible. But it does turn out that that's avoidable. You should just got to be careful in the way that you use the sharpening. And I've been quite surprised that in comparing with stuff that I've done with DxO and Lightroom, and I use DxO specifically so that I can apply good noise reduction to it, so I can then use pretty aggressive sharpening in Lightroom, I've found Silkypix has been matching it, or besting it actually. So I've been quite surprised about that. Finally, we've got one where Silkypix couldn't do as well as Lightroom. Now in this case, this is the raw image, and what we've got is geometric distortion, or lens distortion. It was taken at full wide angle, and this house is leaning inwards, and you can't see it on the video, I'm sure, because I can only just see it from where I'm sitting, but there's a bridge down here, and it's got two stanchions holding up the middle suspension part, and they're leaning inwards as well. So what I want to do is to apply the geometric distortion of the sort that we saw earlier, the lens distortion effect that we saw earlier, and get rid of this this barrel distortion by bending the image around. Unfortunately, and what I wanted to produce was an image that looked like this. Again, this one's got an HDR effect to it as well, because what I've done, it's very dark down here and it's very light up here, and what I've done is to raise this part up, and again it's given this effect that I don't really like. There is something wrong to my eye with the way that looks, and I need to work on that to see if I can improve it. But it is lighter and you can see what's going on there. And I got the part of the image that I want. I mean, this is quite a big crop from on a camera with a small sensor like the FZ200. And I wanted to do that with Silkypix, and I couldn't. Because what happened was, here's the crop that I used in Lightroom. After I'd bent everything around, here's the crop that gave me the image that I wanted, and the stanchions on that bridge are in fact upright. That was good. Then what happened in Silkypix? Now, in order to show you this, this is going to get a bit confusing possibly. This again is Lightroom with the bending that's needed to produce the effect that I wanted. And I got a very similar effect by doing the bending in Silkypix. However, when you're in Lightroom, it lets you see all of this stuff around here, so you can choose where you want to crop it. In Silkypix, it's helpful, which is a real pity, because it decides where the crop is, where it's going to show you, And you can't, as far as I can see, you can't get into the other areas, because this isn't a crop in the normal sense. This is a pre-cropped crop that you can't use the crop tool on it to get it any bigger. That's just what you're given, and you've got to work with. So this crop that I wanted was the red line one, which comes down, I don't know if you can see the bottom of it, but it actually comes down almost to the bottom of the image there. And I simply couldn't do it. I had to produce an image where the bridge was still leaning inwards a little bit. So that's a limitation in Silkypix compared to Lightroom. All these applications have limitations. I mean, one of the ones we found recently in the thread was that DxO can't or doesn't handle wide angle corrections properly on some Panasonic single lens cameras like the FZ1000 and the FZ200. So this is not a don't buy it because it doesn't do this, because there are different things that all of these applications have something or other that they don't do, or they don't do properly, or they don't do well. So that's the result of my first 3 days with Silkypix. I'm enthusiastic about it, still a bit cautious, wondering, well, every time I do a comparison I think, oh, I bet this one won't work, and blow me down. A lot of the time it's actually better. So I'm slowly getting sucked into thinking, yeah, maybe I can use this. It's going well. So that's all for now. There'll be more on this, I expect, at some other point in the not too distant future, but for now, goodbye.